All right. Your basic settings, some procurement, P card, receiving, invoice. So we're gonna cover a wide range of parameters available for procurement. Okay, there we go. This, just for today, this is primarily geared towards procurement administrators. So if you're not one, don't worry, you can stay. But it's just that this is the level of individual who we target with this material. I'll start briefly by introducing myself in the BPC. We'll do a quick overview of what parameters are, and then we'll get into, actually we're not going to go into the system because these aren't something that you can see. So we're just going to talk about them from the screen, but we can certainly have a conversation around those. So this is me. I am a senior consultant in the Best Practice Center supporting North America clients. I have about 7 years of P2P On-Demand experience as a client and managing operations, so everything from end-user support to the administration topics that we're talking about today. So again, we're going to talk about some common parameter settings in Ariba Procure to Pay. If you have P2O or Invoice Pro, that's okay because we're going to hit areas that are just, again, some of those basic settings in invoice and procurement, so you can, gather something from this. Your site may be configured differently from the things that I'm going to say, and that doesn't make that good or bad. It's just based on business process. So these are things that we see commonly within the Best Practice Center when we are assisting clients post-go live. And so we just want to talk about these settings and how they impact the configurations. So typically, parameters are set during deployment when you're doing your workbooks and sitting down with your consulting, whoever's consulting with you. This is where they get this. If you were to want to change a parameter setting once it's in or something that's new, you do those through a service request to our customer support team. Administrators cannot change parameters. In fact, they can't even see them. They're not visible to you. So that's why you go through customer support. We here in the Best Practice Center have visibility to them and will sometimes change them in a test environment, but never in a production environment. Okay. Features and releases sometimes introduce new parameters. So when a new feature comes out, there's usually a parameter that allows you to turn it on or turn it off, or something that sets the way it's going to behave within your solution. Again, you can opt in or opt out for some of these, and user interfaces have been ones that I've seen where there's an opt-in and an opt-out until a certain point, and then you can't opt out anymore. Things like that, different types of receiving. So you'll see a lot coming. There's many references to these within our guide, and what I've done in our presentation today is where I named the full parameter so that if you do want to go back and change something or review it, you will have the exact name of that parameter. Okay, so you will see them often noted in the administration guides with instructions of what the default setting is, and or if you're going to put a feature in, then enable this. You can always use your Best Practice Center consultant to review features and learn how a parameter setting will impact your configuration. It's a great way to utilize that time. So we talk about parameters. What are they? What do they do? They can be involved in thresholds, tolerances. the notifications that are going to come out in this, within your system, your units of measure, payment terms, even how exceptions are handled, and your company locations. Typically, parameters are set, they're a global setting. They are site-wide, which means that even if you have purchasing units in place, these will govern your entire site. Also, if you're integrated, there are some that we'll talk about today that will also, they also carry over into that, okay? But we're really focusing on procurement. I'm not going to talk about ones that are not relative to procurement, but again, because they're global, they could have impact as well. They typically grouped by a document or functionality. So you'll see them named like application.procure or application.charge. And so you'll know that what they're related to based on the naming convention and where they impact. So we're going to start out first with basic settings. And one of the very basic ones is company information. This actually reared its head this week for me with a client. So when if you look at a printed version of your purchase order or your requisition, the system default when out of the box is Ariba. So even though you may have your company address in here, this name is defaulting to Ariba, and it's actually a parameter that we very commonly see gets kind of overlooked or you know, not discussed, or I don't know, with certain deployments. And so this is one that typically an organization will set to their own company name rather than the Ariba name. So because you don't want them billing to Ariba or so forth, or maybe you do. But that is something that, again, we sort of getting overlooked from time to time, and it's a quick one. And you don't necessarily notice it because printing in an E environment, you know, isn't something that we think to test all the time, but it's there. And it's one of those things that you should, you know, take a look at, make sure it's set in your system correctly. And it's easy to test. Just take a requisition or a purchase order and hit the print button at the top, and if you see Ariba, you know that it wasn't revisited. Okay. Here's another one that comes up, your email parameters. So email has actually several parameters associated to the notifications, and one of them is just turning that on. So this is how our parameters are named. Application.base.email approval enabled. That basically says we're going to enable approval via email, okay? And this one is one that you turn on or off, and that basically says, yes, we're going to. This next one is email domain check. So this one is more of a control, whether you're going to check that the approval is actually coming from your specified domain. So if I'm at companyabc.com, you know, all of our emails end in, you know, abc.com, you want to make sure that all the approval emails are also coming from that domain. Otherwise, people could be forwarding things to personal Yahoo account or some other, you know, non-company-based email, and that allows other people to approve for them. So you don't want to have that be the case. So this is usually a check that, again, we put in place. Once you enable this, this is normally coming, you know, hand in hand. The next one is enabling the enhanced HTML email format. So this is not brand new, but this is new within probably the last 12 to 18 months. There's a HTML format that comes with enhanced features. If you don't have this on, you get a different version of the email approval where it's not that glossy, slick look with the email buttons and some of the more detailed email. It just basically is an approve, deny type of situation. So this is one, unless you're using a BlackBerry, most folks are turning this on for iPhone or Android users and allowing the HTML format so that they can get those enhanced features in the email notifications. Another one,
Alice, can we ask a question right here? Sorry.
Yes. Go ahead.
The question is the bill to very configurable? We have multiple companies within each ERP, and each has a pay-to-legal entity for tax purposes.
So you can, there's an address.csv file that you can put bill tos in, but generally speaking, each company has a single bill to location. It's their sort of their main parent headquarters, centralized. If you have purchasing units enabled, you can definitely put those in because they would be acknowledged as multiple legal entities, and then you could have that. So it's under certain circumstances, yes, but typically the system believes in having one bill to address.
One more question before you move forward. Can we have multiple domain names for the parameter enforce email domain check?
Yes, you can. And you can actually, within user profiles, have more than one business email address, which is where you would have to actually put that in as well. You need to make sure that it's in your user, I think there's an alternate email address. I think that's what it's called. Don't quote me on that field. But I actually had to do that at one company where we had changed our email from one to another, and we had to, you know, there were name changes and everything. So people were still using their old ones and their new ones, and we had to put them in. So yes, you can. Any other questions?
That's all from the chat.
Okay. All right. The last one I'm listing here is not actually a setting that is about how email looks or whether email is used, but actually this sort of sets the timing of some of those escalations and notifications. And this is the base company holidays. So there's two actually. You have a list of holidays that you would that have to be updated every year. And then there's a skip weekends and holidays that is enabled that basically tells the system, don't count weekends and holidays when you're escalating or setting the next notification out. So it doesn't, so if you have your escalation set to 7 days, it's 7 business days. It's not 7 calendar days. And that's what that does. The company holidays, though, and I've kind of called this out here, they have to be set every year because they are date-based. So things like Christmas that happen every year, December 25th, regardless of what day of the week it falls on, that's okay. But in the U.S., something that is like a Memorial Day where it's that last Monday, or Thanksgiving where it's on the Thursday, right, that actual date changes every year. So we have to go in and adjust this every year. So this is something, you know, each year come, you know, December time frame, you would be, or whenever your year end is, you would be sending that list to Ariba to update this for you. Okay. Another one is your fiscal year. So when your fiscal year starts, and so if you don't have a traditional, or even if you do have a traditional January, December fiscal year, but this is used in your reporting calculations, and there's actually, you know, where you might want to report fiscally and it's different from the calendar, you want to make sure that you're including that in so that you can get that. I've worked at a company whose fiscal year began in May, and so this was important to us because if we wanted to get reporting for that year, for that fiscal year, that certainly wasn't going to be a January to December report. And so these are things that will impact that for your reporting. That's where I see this being the biggest impact. Okay, so that is the base setting area, and now we're going to move over into procurement. So I know I had a couple of questions, but I'm going to take a moment to pause and see if there are any others related to these base settings before we get into the next section.
I don't have any questions in the chat. If anyone wants to ask a question to Alice, please feel free to press *6, and then your lines will be unmuted.
Hi, this is Karthik Srinivasan from Smith & Nephew. I have a question on this fiscal month. So you mean it's configurable in Ariba to match with our current ERP system?
Yeah, so whatever your fiscal year is, yes, you can make it so that you define when your fiscal year begins and ends. So you know when you again, mine was a May 1 start, so that's what we defined. May 1 was the beginning of my fiscal year, and obviously the end would be April 30th.
Right, and then apart from the beginning and the end, we also have the 5-4-4 concept, the 5 weeks, 4 weeks, 4 weeks. So each month, each fiscal period would not end on the calendar month, it would be on a different date. That's also configurable, I would guess?
Oh, no, this is just a year. Yeah, no, that I don't know that there's a configuration for that. No, I don't believe so.
Okay.
I can, if you don't mind sending an email, you can, or letting Deborah have your email address, we'll take a look, but I don't believe that that's something. I only know of the fiscal new year.
Right. The reason I'm asking is I'm not sure what exactly it's going to drive in Ariba behind the scenes, but if we run a report and then the report says, you know, I want everything for, say, period 5, and will Ariba know what period 5 with respect to my downstream system is? So that's where.
Right. It is a reporting. This definitely impacts reporting. And I don't know that it necessarily knows periods the way, you know, like an SAP knows periods. It really does still look at these fiscal year, quarter, and month are still sort of date-driven. So it's going to look at a fiscal quarter, you know, again, in my instance was May, June, July was my first quarter. It knows to kind of go 3 months from the beginning and sort of look at it that way. I don't know that it knows periods that way.
Okay, we can take it offline, and you know, I can send you an email.
Yeah, I haven't come across that, but I will take I'll take a look and I'll take a deeper dive to see if there's anything that can define periods.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for your question.
Alice, there is another question. Is setting the fiscal year something administrators can do, or do you need to follow the SR process? This is for one of our guests.
Yeah, this is an SR process.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, this one definitely, because it's a parameter. It's set in the parameter. Okay, that's it. Thanks. I'm going to move on to the procurement section, but you can obviously ask questions as we go through this, and we backtrack if we want to. So this next one is about ad hoc locations, and this comes up This actually comes up quite a bit when you have operatives in the field. You know, if you have a sales force that doesn't really work out of a main office, you know, particularly for ship to. Deborah and I are very, we're examples of this. We don't work out of an SAP main office. We work home-based, basically. So if I was to order a laptop or office supplies, I would need them shipped to my home address, my home office. And so for that, that's not going to be one of those ship-to locations that's usually in your human resource location. It's truly an ad hoc. So to be able to use those is there's the application procure allow ad hoc ship-to addresses, and it's you know, whether or not you're going to allow those. And then you can also, when you do, that makes them visible in a preferences menu. So if you were to go in as yourself, now ad hoc locations are saved locally. They are not stored globally. So if I create that ad hoc ship-to address, it's really only usable by me. It's not something that becomes in the grand pick list in the solution. You know, that's, we want to protect personally identifiable information, right? So, but I can manage that. There'll be an option in my preferences that says manage non-standard addresses. So let's say it's not a home address and I'm an event planner for a company, and I need to order supplies but have them shipped to a location where the event is occurring. I don't need to send things to myself, only to travel with them, right? So that would be, you know, another non-standard address, and I may accumulate these, and, you know, one time or once every 3 years, I use the Javits Center as a location for an event, and I'm not going to keep that and maintain that. You can actually activate and deactivate your non-standard addresses to keep your pick list clean, okay? These are not typically fed into your ERP from P2P. We don't usually have any kind of validation on ad hoc locations. So these, the default ship to location is what's exported, and that is because, you know, if you were storing them in your ERP, then they really wouldn't be an ad hoc location usually. But if we were to send them in the PO exports, you would have a data mismatch because they wouldn't exist there. So the system knows to just send the default ship to location when an ad hoc is used. The next one up for our procurement is payment terms. Now they're brought into Ariba from your supplier master data. Each supplier is going to be defined as having payment terms. Some maybe your utilities you pay net to, versus others you pay, you know, certain, like other types of service providers, you pay net 60. It's all cash flow, right? If a supplier record did not have payment terms on it, then this default payment term that's noted in this parameter is the one that it will default to. So, for instance, my company had net 60. That was our standard payment term. So if you didn't have a payment term with us, you got net 60. That was it. So the application procure default payment term is the one that's going to specify that default payment term when no terms are specified on an invoice, okay, or a purchase order contract, right? So if the supplier, it does not have that associated to them, then this default will take place. It will not override what you have on that supplier in the master data if you have something different. the default for that parameter is actually PT1, which means there's no value. So you have to set this or else you get nothing. This one, there's actually, this one is default payment terms. There's a separate similar parameter for non-PO invoices. So this one doesn't cover non-PO invoices. Many of the parameters associated to non-PO are exclusive to non-PO because that document is treated differently.
So Alice, one of our guests wants to know, is this from SAP MK or FK field? I'm not sure what MK or FK field is, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. So I'm not an integration expert, and I don't know which field that would come off of, but there is a payment term field that comes in the master data for, you'd have to look at your import and see what's being brought in. I apologize, I'm not an SAP integration expert. I don't know the fields in SAP that well.
MK is the purchasing tab, FK is the finance tab.
Hello.
In SAP.
Okay, so and again, I don't know, but I would guess you're purchasing. But I can't say with, because that would most likely be the data that you're feeding into Ariba is the purchasing data versus financial data. But it'll depend on what you're importing.
Sharon?
I'm sorry?
So Alice is the presenter.
Okay. I just have one small request, actually.
Sure.
Actually, I love your classes, but can I have one small request, if possible?
Yeah.
The thing is, I just want to, I appreciate and I would love to hear whether it is possible to have a integration class, since you mentioned now integration, because I was very keen and very, excited to know how the data gets transferred from SAP MM through SAP transports into PI, and from there what PI guy will do to get those data into Ariba. This is the dream session, I would say. I want to see from anyone.
Okay, well, you know what, there are sessions on that, but they're not done by us in BPC because the integration is not something that we support in the Best Practice Center. We, the walls of what we support kind of begin and end within the application itself. But there are people at SAP who do they specialize in integration, and there are sessions on it. I don't know that they're given free, but if you send your email address to us, I will look to connect you with the person that, that might be providing those and how you can access those. Okay?
That will be so great of you, Sharon.
Oh, no, I'm Alice, but that's okay.
Yeah, Alice, it will be so great of you because I'm that much eager to know, like, from where it comes and how it gets settled in Ariba, and the same too, vice versa, how it happens.
Yep, yep. So again, my guess on that one is you're sending procurement level data, but you would be able to see that in your imports, and you can see your imports in the application. When you log into core administration and you go to site administration, there's a data import and export, and you can look at your imports, and there's even a data dictionary in there. If we have a moment towards the end, I'll see if I can get in there and show you that, and that might help you a little bit in the mapping, okay?
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. Thanks a lot, please.
Oh, you're quite welcome. All right, our next parameter that we're going to talk about is unit of measure. And Ariba has preloaded lists, units of measure, and you'll see them. When I was training users to create the requisitions in the companies that I worked for, we used to have a lot of fun picking out oddball units of measure that didn't relate at all to the books that we were publishing or the content that we were making. Things like kegs and rails and things like that. but the value in the unit of measure parameter, it has to, first of all, it has to match that value in the unit of measure list. So, you know, the list is what it is, and you have to match to that list. Now, there may be customizations, I'm not aware of them, but basically Ariba has one that's loaded, and that's what the default will be. This is really for your non-catalog items or items that don't have a unit of measure. Some services, if you have them, you know, don't necessarily come in with a unit of measure associated to them. The default value on this parameter is EA, which stands for each. It's one I've used because it's so easy. But you know, if you know that 80–90% of the procurement that you're going to do is going to come in at a particular unit of measure, and that matters to you, then you can change that, and that's this procure default unit of measure will do that for you. Something like hours, if that matters, right? Okay. The next section is on P cards. Now, I didn't go into great detail here, but this is an area that we're seeing more and more use. So these are parameters that are related to that I just thought would be of good knowledge to have. So the first one, application procure consent P card order for non-catalog, specifies that's basically can your purchasing card, can a charge order contain non-catalog line items? So whether or not you want to be able to allow users to, you know, create basically an ad hoc line item to go onto a P card. Is that something you want? If this is set to no, and someone was to put a line item on there, it would actually then force them to create a traditional purchase order. So it will it'll tell them that they can't put this on a charge, and it'll force it over to the traditional purchasing order method, and that's what will happen. The default on this one is no. So if you want to allow people to put non-catalog, you have to, this is a change you will have to make. When we talked about thresholds at the beginning, this is the amount threshold that can be set for each line item in a purchasing card order. So the default on this parameter is 1,000. Some companies have a policy that will say, you know, anything above $500 needs to be put through a purchase order, and we'll pay that via, you know, check or, you know, direct deposit or what, ACH, right? Whereas, you know, anything below that, we don't mind putting on a P card, and, you know, and it's cash flow management. That's what this is about. So if the line item were to exceed that, it won't be included in the charge order, and it would, again, the system will sort of force that over to the traditional purchase order. So this is usually set based on policy, but the default value is $1,000 on that one. So these are just a few that fall into the purchasing card order.
Alice, can we go back a second? I'm sorry. So we have a question. Can the unit of measure be defaulted to no value?
I don't know. I don't know if it can be left with nothing. I think each is the one that I think it has to be. I think you have to have a unit of measure.
I would agree.
On a requisition. Yeah, I think that's actually required. So I think that's why there's a default in there. They're easy to change. It's a drop-down menu in the requisition. So the idea of setting that default is only when it's missing that you would have that in there. It's not, again, it doesn't override your catalog unit of measures in any way. It's basically to make sure that there's a value in there when the value is missing. So leaving it blank wouldn't benefit you because you'd end up with that error. Your users would end up with an error when they're creating their requisitions.
So I think the goal of the question was to ensure that the users select a value. So if it's set at no value, but it must contain a value, that's the question.
Okay. Well, that's why, that's kind of, if that's the case and you don't like the each and you really want some other unit of measure, the best control for that is a catalog. Whether it's a general SIF one that you create just with, you can specify no supplier on those and basically just say, all right, here's a typical line item, no price, no supplier, but it defaults your commodity code, your accounting, and your unit of measure. That's the best control method for something like that. Again, that parameter is meant to be used when there is no unit of measure. So if you're not providing it in a catalog or you're not providing it, your supplier's not providing it in their catalog, that's why. And the only place that I can think that that's going to be rather routinely is a non-catalog order.
Can the default unit of measure be overwritten?
Yes, absolutely. That's the whole idea. It's a pick list, but it's to make sure that you have a value. So you can change it if you want to. I think the only place you can't is when it's coming out of like a punch-out catalog. You can't change that. I don't know about SIF catalogs, but I know you with the punch-out you definitely can't because that means the supplier needs that unit of measure.
And that's it for our questions. Thanks.
Okay. So continuing on with purchasing cards or charge orders, purchasing cards are put through validation, and only specific roles actually do this validation. They validate the charge before it's processed for payment. If you want to skip that validation on a low-value transaction because there's manual effort involved, there's an application charge skip amount or an application charge auto accept percentage. These two parameters will help you kind of reduce that volume. So if it's a $5 charge, maybe you don't really need to do a lot of validation. So the skip amount skips the validation on that threshold. It's an amount, and the default for that is $5. This actually can throw folks for a loop because actually some organizations have a zero tolerance for this on P cards. And so it's not necessarily apparent that that's the value that's defaulted in there. Then the auto accept parameter, that's a decimal value, and where it compares a percentage. And so if you don't have, so say you have that $1,000 limit, and it's a $1,000 line item. Well, in this, the default value is 0.15, so $15 will cause the validation to not occur. 15, basically, sort of a variance of that. So if it's below that threshold, P2P auto validates that charge and accepts the exception without it having to go through reconciliation. So that's, these are two different parameters, but they help control that volume. Again, that default being 15, you need to take that in with the previous one, which is, what is each line item going to be, and then figure that, and that's what you could potentially have. Okay. So next, that was P cards, and I just want to see if there's any questions before I go into the next, which is receiving.
No questions in the chat window. If anyone wants to ask a question, please feel free to press *6 to talk to Alice.
Hi, this is Nidhi.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question on the ad hoc parameter, the ad hoc ship to.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So we also have the same parameter for the ad hoc bill to addresses, right? I mean, the issue is that, yeah, so even if we turn off these parameters, they don't stop getting added in the plan.csv file, right? We have the same issue that the ad hoc addresses were getting created, and we wanted to stop that, and we turned off, we created an SR in our support to turn off those parameters, but they were still like getting generated in the plan.csv file. So what support told us is that even you turn them off, they're not going to stop. So is there any way that we can, if we don't want anybody to be able to create ad hoc addresses, be it ship to or bill to, can we do this? Can we stop the creation of these ad hoc addresses?
So my experience is when the allow ad hoc ship to address is not enabled, then that ability, when you go into the ship to, the new button isn't even there for you to create it. Now, a bill to, the bill to defaulted, I've never seen that unless you're talking about that these are on the network where the supplier is doing this. In which case, these are all within procure to pay. These are not network. These are not parameters that will impact the network. So are you telling me that users are able to create ad hoc bill tos on their requisitions?
No, users are not able to create ad hoc bill to. It's the supplier when they are using a CSV upload method to create the invoice, and they are not using the correct address which is provided to them. Yeah. So every time that invoice comes in, it creates an ad hoc bill to address. And that ad hoc, because the address.
Yeah, those are network settings. Those are not parameters. So I don't know, again, that doesn't fall within the walls of Ariba procurement. That's actually a network setting. And so I don't know that you can, you're right, I don't know whether you can stop that creation on the network. But this is related to the procurement piece. And so if you have if you do not have allow ad hoc ship to address enabled, a user internally is not able to create that. The external supplier sending it should fail. It should not take it in. And that's an education piece, I think, more than anything else, than, stopping your suppliers from doing that. If it delays their invoice payments, they'll start to learn, I think.
Okay, thank you so much, Alice. Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, our next section is receiving parameters. Receipt notification parameters, they run off of two settings. If you elect the receipt notification based on a need by date, and if you use need by date on your requisitions, then these notifications get sent based on those. Or you can do it based on the order date. When you use the order date, there's also something that allows you to then build in a lead time, and also those holidays and weekends that we talked about earlier in our base settings, and maybe that was the base settings, that they take effect here, okay? When this parameter is set for yes, when the receipt notification based on need by date is set for yes, then it will look at the need by date that's on the requisition, and at that point, that's when it starts chasing up for receipts. If it's set to no or false, then it looks at the order date, and the order date is the default, okay? So you have this receipt notification based on need by date, and when you have that enabled, then the receipts are chased up based on the need by date. So if you're ordering and you have your need by date is 2 weeks from now, you won't be chased for that. You won't be, the notification for the receipt will not be there, will not be sent. Now, that's not to say that the receipt isn't generated in the system. It is, and those are run on a job, so they're usually a couple hours. But the receipt will be there. You just won't get the email notification to go in and acknowledge that receipt until the need by date has come. Okay, and again, it will evaluate that based on whether or not the quantity has been fully received. Okay. Then there's another one that's escalation notification period, and this is, it determines if an escalation email is sent. If it's set to 0, then no escalation email is sent. Actually, I think that might be -1, but okay. And if it's a value, then the escalation is sent based on the previous need by date, or it's ordered if it's on the ordered status, then it's by the date, plus you can define a lead time and those holidays and weekends. So that is what's specified in the notification period. Otherwise, if you have the need by date and you don't want any escalation, then you can use this. If you're using the order date and you don't want any escalation, you can also use this, but if you do, then you can kind of set it to when it will escalate. You might want it to escalate 7, 10 days. The one thing about the solution is it does allow you to set escalation by the request type. So not everything has to go at the same time, but the default, I believe, is 14 days on everything out of the box. Okay. Here's some relating to ordering. So for ordering and your ordering method. So the ordering method determines if only a purchase order or if you're also allowed for a charge order allowed. And these are based on your ERP. So you'll go in and there's a parameter by ERP for this. But it basically is the application procure order methods, and it'll list, the system will search from top to bottom. So you want to make sure that these are in the right order. And it'll stop with the first order method that matches what's within the parameter. So the last order method in the list will be the one that can process all line item types in a requisition. So it's going to look through and say, is order going to do this? If not, is it this? And it's going to keep looking through this list. This by default is a blank list, so you will have to set something in here, or everything kind of just falls to a standard purchase order. But this is something the order matters here a lot. So when you're setting these, it's important to rank them appropriately. Okay. Let's see what we have next. Purchasing units. So this is something that we use purchasing units to segregate data. Supplier, accounting data typically are 2 reasons why we use purchasing units. Legal entities are another. When we use purchasing units, it allows for certain things like those multiple bill tos and multiple terms and conditions to be used in the solution. Suppliers and user data, I'm sorry. So suppliers and users are defined by purchasing units, and when they are, then they become visible based on those definitions. So if I'm defined as a US user and Deborah's defined as a UK user, we only see people that are defined likewise. The same with we would only see suppliers that are defined likewise. This is called Application Feature Edit Requisition PU Field SG. SG only. That specifies whether or not you can actually edit the purchasing unit on a requisition. And there's a visibility control that's enabled on your site. So you have to first put the visibility control in to allow the purchasing unit to be editable. That again, if we had that same instance where I'm in the US and Deborah's in the UK, and I need to create a requisition for the UK, say I'm a buyer for a particular commodity and I do that globally, I need to be able to create those requisitions across other purchasing units. So you want to make sure that you've extended the purchasing unit in my permissions to me. And the visibility control is what starts this process. The visibility control is application approval, organization, visibility, partition parameters. So this allows for that. These parameters, they're only applicable to these two are for SG. That's why it has the simple generic variant is why it has the SG in it. Let me go. So another area is whether or not you allow change orders.
Hi.
Now, I'm sorry.
Karthik wasn't here. Sorry to interrupt. Can I ask a question? I was on mute. I was talking. In the previous slide, can I have a question on the purchasing unit, please?
Yeah.
So will that be a requirement if there are more than one chart of accounts being used? So in other words, there is a difference in accounting treatment. Will that be required to be created as a separate purchasing units between organizations?
No, you could do that at a company level. So in the accounting structures, you can do company level, and that would segregate your accounting data. Typically, suppliers and users are the reason that if you have to segregate users or segregate suppliers, that's why you would use purchasing units. If you need to segregate, you know, based on those being companies, you know, being legal entities, that's typically where accounting can be segregated at a company level within the structures of within the structures of the accounting setup. Yeah.
Thanks.
Now I know SAP kind of lets accounting. SAP lets accounting. I think it doesn't really have that structure in place where it. I want to say there's like that lack of validation within like account to cost centers and stuff like that.
Right, it's inherited from the org object or the legal entity that you're using. So normally it's inherited from there. I was only wondering if I have one downstream and then if I operate multiple chart of accounts, say one for Japan, another one for US, do they have to be distinctly on different purchasing units? Is what I was.
They don't have to because you can build the if you can build the validation at a company, at least at the company level, then you're fine. It doesn't dictate that you have to. However, I've seen it done, but it's not a mandate. It wouldn't be the only way you could accomplish that.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Alice, let me ask you another question on that same slide. Does the purchasing unit control document visibility? And if it does it enable multiple users to edit or update the same requisition?
It does. It does. Let's see. So, for instance, if in this scenario where I am in the U.S. and Deborah's in the UK, let's say in that instance I report to Deborah. She's my immediate supervisor. When I create a requisition on behalf of myself, and we have the immediate supervisor invoked as first level approval, regardless of our purchasing unit assignment, Deborah will be invoked and will be able to see that document and all that's on it, attachments and comments and so forth. So with that, it doesn't restrict. However, if Deborah was looking to run reports, say she ran an entire operational segment for my ABC company, and she wanted to run reports that looked at financial data across these two that weren't just related to her immediate subordinates, but, you know, were operational reports, we would need to extend the permission of Report Manager outside of just the UK to the US to allow her to see data in the reports for both areas. So it does limit visibility of some of data, but if a user is naturally invoked in an approval, they'll be able to see that regardless of where it started and where they are. Did that answer that question?
I think it does.
Okay.
That's the last one on that one. Thank you.
Okay. I think we have a few more slides to get through, so I best set this up. All right, change orders. So sometimes it's necessary to actually control that change order process. Whether it be your ERP or some supplier systems, they can't manage change orders. I actually lived this scenario with, I had suppliers that couldn't manage change orders. The change and change order button appear with something that's called application procure allow change requisition. So that is separate, it's completely separate from cancel and cancel order, which don't appear until something is fully approved. So this is on the requisition where the cancel and cancel order on the purchase order. So even when the change order is set to no, an order can still be canceled. So this is actually just, you know, I just want to differentiate between changing, which happens on a requisitional level, and canceling, which happens on a purchase order. The default on this one is yes, we allow them. So it's only when you come up against an issue with your ERP or your supplier system that you have to go in and change that. There are parameters also that allow an organization to set conditions for change orders, like as in if it's partially shipped received. So you can set that as well. Most will say, you know, once it's received, I don't want it to be changed. Again, that depends on what your ERP can manage and what you're doing with them. Okay. Now we're going to get into our invoice section. So that was the end of sort of our ordering and stuff, and we're going to get into our invoice parameters. The first one is related to attachments. So whether internal or external can be controlled, these attachments are internal or external, meaning coming from your supplier source, they can be controlled. The default value is set to no. There's application feature toggle restrict deletion of the invoice attachments. That's an internal name. And there's an invoicing restrict deletion of invoice attachments external name. And yes says a user is restricted from deleting the invoice or invoice reconciliation attachment. No says a user who adds an invoice attachment can delete them. So this is not to say that it gets down the line and somebody can strip anything. You can. It's really only whether if you're allowing somebody who's attached it to delete it. Okay. So that's sort of those parameters. Most folks go with allowing a user to delete what they've attached, but you know, no one else can in the approval flow. Okay. Dates adjusted for time zones. So this, I actually lived this one as well. So I had invoice. I had my invoices processed in my Singapore office, but they were doing them globally. And so, of course, there's a significant time difference between Singapore and the U.S. And this became an issue for me when we would look back in the history and the invoice dates wouldn't match up, right? So Invoicing use invoice date as calendar date parameter, and this determines how the invoice dates are displayed across time zones. The default value on this is no, so it doesn't use the invoice date. So if the invoice date is the date and time that an invoice is submitted by a supplier for payment or a processor, not the date it was loaded into the system. So as a result of that, the date can be displayed according to your client's time zone, right? So again, if you're doing business globally, it's going to look like it was, in some instances, it was actually done tomorrow, and that hasn't happened yet. So you start to run reports and things like that, and things don't make sense, right? The value, when it's set to yes, the invoice date appears the same regardless of the client's time zone. So this gets you that standardization in dates. If it's no, the original behavior is maintained. This definitely came up for me again when I had, and you know, again, if clients are using any kind of offshore processing, this is something it's worth visiting. Okay. Remittance location. So on this one's a little tiny because there's a lot here. Application invoicing, validate remittance location. This is whether or not you want to validate that remittance. And I tend to go with no because Ariba is not the source of truth on remittance information. Your vendor master is, which is typically in your ERP system. So unless you're using Ariba as your vendor master, doesn't really make a whole hill of difference to validate the remittance location in Ariba, and yet folks don't turn this one off and get to all sorts of errors when things come across the network, okay? So set the application to false to disable that location validation, especially if you're using an external payment model, and again, source of truth being the remittance information is your ERP. If it's false, then the remittance locations for the suppliers, they're not loaded into the system, and it can have other impacts. So if an invoice is loaded, created, and approved, and the IR is generated with that payment, if there's no remittance location set, the payment type is set, right? So you get a payment type without that remittance location. If the designated payment method is credit card, then the charge is also indicated in the payment, and if there's no remittance location, then the payment will create a validation error. So if you are using charge orders, this has some impact. So you just need to make sure that your designated payment method or the first specified on the list of payment methods is not a credit card. That's going back to those P card orders, right? And the order of those payment methods making it, this is where it becomes important. So it all ties in. Okay, quick wrap up. I'm just going to say, so there's over 100 parameters that can be configured for a site, and they're usually done during deployment. They're based on your feedback. You're getting asked questions. You don't know it, but there's a setting behind the curtains that is, you know, you say yes, we flip this on. You say no, we flip another one on, right? Every new feature that's coming out in Ariba usually comes out with a set of parameters to opt in or set a condition for that. So as you're going through these new features, you're going to start to see, oh, there's, you know, we've got it. If we want this, we have to opt into this feature, this parameter, okay? You cannot set these by customer at your customer level, and if you're using third-party consulting, they will not have access to do these either. These are done by Ariba. So if you need to make these changes to parameter settings, you do it, your designated service contact will do it through a service request, usually to customer service. This is a quick snapshot, and if anybody requests the deck, you'll obviously get this, but these are what we have upcoming for our webinar schedule. So today we had an administration workshop for collaborative sourcing, and today we have the common parameters. There's going to be an administration workshop. This one is APAC. So this is our APJ. You can see that we try to do one a month for them. We're going to have contract compliance. This is in the procurement space in December. Managing users and monitoring licenses. This is for collaborative sourcing where the licenses are used. All About Conditions is another one that's for collaborative sourcing, and Ariba Pay is a specific area of procurement that we're going to discuss. So these are upcoming. There will be, if you haven't already gotten them, I think you have, but there's registration links in the emails that go out, and all of our signatures have them as well. So with that, I'm just going to say, you know, subscribers who have Ariba Best Practice, you gain access to experts like Deborah and myself, and we can give you strategic advice that is directly, we can help you with these parameters and help you get that. So if you need more information about BPC or whether you're entitled to it, please reach out to your customer engagement executive. In fact, one company I know is a client of mine, so that I heard on here today. So hopefully you'll be reaching out and we'll get engaged soon if you have any further questions. And with that, I'm going to say thank you very much. I apologize for running a little over today, but I hope it was worth your time. If there are any questions, you can go ahead and, Deborah, if you want to stop the recording, that's fine as well.